Most Christians celebrate Halloween without knowing its true history. They see it as a harmless American tradition, costumes, candy, and fun. But October 31st didn't start with trick-or-treating in suburban neighborhoods. It started over 2,000 years ago in the forests of ancient Ireland and Scotland, where druids performed rituals so dark that historical records struggle to fully describe them. This wasn't a harvest festival or autumn celebration. It was a night dedicated to death, spirits, and practices that the Bible explicitly condemns as abominations. Understanding Halloween's real origins will forever change how you see this holiday. In this video, we're going to trace Halloween from its beginning in pagan death cults, through the church's failed attempt to Christianize it, to its modern form as commercialized occultism. You'll discover why witches and Satanists call October 31st their most sacred night, and why no Christian should participate in celebrations rooted in practices God condemned. Make sure you watch until the end, because what Halloween represents today is exactly what it represented 2 millennia ago, just wrapped in different packaging. If you want historical truth that protects your faith, subscribe to this channel, hit that like button, and comment the country you're watching from. Share this with Christians who need to understand what they're really celebrating. Now let's go back over 2,000 years to the dark forests of Celtic lands, where Halloween's story begins with a festival that honored death and opened doors to the spirit world. Over 2,000 years ago, in what is now Ireland, Scotland, and parts of northern Europe, the Celtic people marked their calendar by the rhythms of nature. Their year ended on October 31st, the day when summer's warmth finally surrendered to winter's cold, when the last harvest was gathered, and when darkness began its reign over the land. The Celts called this transition Samhain, pronounced Samhain, and they believed that on this specific night, the boundary between the living world and the world of the dead became thin enough to cross. This wasn't a celebration of harvest or gratitude. It was a festival dedicated to death, spirits, and the supernatural forces the Celts both feared and tried to manipulate. The Druids, Celtic priests who served as religious leaders, judges, and keepers of knowledge, orchestrated Samhain's rituals. Historical records and archaeological evidence reveal practices that are disturbing even by ancient standards. On the night of October 31st, Celtic villages would extinguish every fire in every home, plunging entire communities into complete darkness. The Druids would then light a massive sacred bonfire on hilltops, and these fires weren't symbolic. They were functional. Ancient texts describe how the Celts would sacrifice animals, and, according to Roman historians like Julius Caesar and Tacitus, who documented Celtic practices, sometimes humans were burned alive in wicker cages as offerings to Celtic gods. The people would then take flames from this sacrificial fire back to their homes to relight their hearths, believing this fire held protective power against the spirits they believed were walking among them that night. But Samhain wasn't just about fire and sacrifice. It was about intentional communication with the dead and spirit world. The Celts believed that on October 31st, the souls of those who died during the year would return to visit their former homes. They set out food and drink for these spirits, hoping to appease them. They also believed that malicious spirits, fairies, and demons could cross over on this night, so they wore costumes made from animal skins and grotesque masks, trying to disguise themselves as spirits to avoid harm. Druids would practice divination, attempting to predict the future by interpreting signs, reading omens, and some historical accounts suggest they examined the entrails of sacrificed animals to gain supernatural knowledge. These practices weren't folklore or superstition to the Celts. They were serious religious rituals designed to interact with supernatural forces. The Bible's condemnation of these practices is explicit and severe. Deuteronomy 18:10-12 commands, There shall not be found among you anyone who burns his son or his daughter as an offering, anyone who practices divination or tells fortunes or interprets omens, or a sorcerer or a charmer or a medium or a necromancer or one who inquires of the dead. For whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord. Every single practice central to Samhain, human sacrifice, divination, communicating with the dead, attempting to manipulate spirits, is explicitly listed as an abomination that God condemns. The Celts weren't just having a cultural celebration. They were engaging in the exact spiritual practices that God threatened to destroy nations for performing. Samhain was fundamentally a festival of death and demonic communication. This wasn't ancient history that disappeared. These practices continued for centuries in Celtic lands, passed down through generations as sacred tradition. When Christianity began spreading through Europe in the early centuries after Christ, it encountered Samhain as a deeply entrenched religious festival with thousands of years of tradition behind it. The collision between biblical Christianity and this pagan death festival would shape what eventually became Halloween. But the Church's attempt to deal with Samhain didn't eliminate its darkness. In many ways, it simply gave it a new name. By the 7th and 8th centuries AD, Christianity had spread throughout much of Europe, including the Celtic territories where Samhain was still celebrated every October 31st. The Church faced a dilemma. How do you eliminate a pagan festival that has been practiced for over 1,000 years and is woven into the culture's very identity? The solution the Catholic Church chose was not confrontation but assimilation. They would attempt to Christianize Samhain by placing a Christian holy day on top of it, hoping the pagan practices would eventually fade away. This strategy was called syncretism, and it has been one of the most devastating compromises in church history. In 609 AD, Pope Boniface IV established All Saints' Day, also called All Hallows' Day, to honor Christian martyrs and saints. Initially, this feast was celebrated in May, far from any connection to Samhain. But in 835 AD, Pope Gregory IV made a deliberate decision. He moved All Saints' Day from May to November 1st, placing it directly on top of the Celtic festival. The evening before November 1st became known as All Hallows' Eve, the evening before the Day of the Holy Ones. Over time, All Hallows' Eve was shortened to Halloween. The Church's intention was clear: replace the pagan death festival with a Christian remembrance of saints, and the people would gradually abandon their old practices for the new Christian holy day. But the strategy failed catastrophically. Instead of Christianity replacing paganism, the two merged into a confused mixture where people attended church services on November 1st, but continued their pagan rituals on October 31st. The bonfires continued, though now they were sometimes called Christian fires. The offerings to spirits continued, though people might pray to Christian saints while still appeasing pagan entities. The costumes and masks continued, though the justification changed while the practice remained identical. What emerged wasn't Christianity conquering paganism. It was paganism wearing a Christian mask. The name changed from Samhain to Halloween, but the spiritual reality underneath remained rooted in practices God condemned. The Bible never instructs believers to Christianize pagan festivals. It commands complete separation from them. 2 Corinthians 6:14-17 is explicit. What partnership has righteousness with lawlessness? Or what fellowship has light with darkness? What accord has Christ with Belial? Therefore go out from their midst, and be separate from them, says the Lord, and touch no unclean thing. God's instruction isn't to rename pagan festivals with Christian names. It's to come out from them completely and be separate. When the early church in Acts encountered pagan practices, believers didn't try to redeem them or Christianize them. Acts 19:18-19 records, "Many of those who were now believers came, confessing and divulging their practices. And a number of those who had practiced magic arts brought their books together and burned them." They destroyed their connection to paganism completely. The church's attempt to Christianize Halloween created a dangerous precedent that continues today. The idea that we can take practices rooted in paganism and occultism, slap a Christian label on them, and somehow make them acceptable to God. This is exactly what many churches do now with harvest festivals and trunk or treat events on October 31st. They're using Christian vocabulary while participating in the same date, the same costumes, and the same practices that originated in Samhain. The spiritual compromise that began in 835 AD when the church tried to merge with paganism instead of confronting it continues in modern Christianity. Halloween never became Christian. Christianity became compromised by trying to adopt it. By the medieval period, October 31st in Europe was a strange hybrid, officially Christian, but practically still pagan. The darkest practices of Samhain continued in rural areas, often in secret, and these practices were far more disturbing than most modern people realize. The historical records of what actually happened during Samhain and early Halloween celebrations are darker than most Christians realize. While modern Halloween focuses on candy and costumes, the original October 31st celebrations involved practices so disturbing that many historians hesitate to describe them fully. But understanding these realities is crucial for Christians deciding whether to participate in this holiday's modern form. The truth is that Samhain wasn't just about honoring the dead, it was about blood sacrifice, occult divination, and rituals designed to manipulate supernatural forces through methods God explicitly condemns as abominations worthy of death. Roman historians who encountered Celtic practices documented what they witnessed with shock and horror. Julius Caesar, in his accounts of the Gallic Wars, described how Druids constructed massive human-shaped cages from wicker, filled them with living people, often criminals but sometimes innocent victims, and burned them alive as sacrifices to Celtic gods. Strabo, another Roman historian, wrote about how Druids would stab sacrificial victims and interpret the future by watching how they died and examining their death convulsions. Archaeological evidence supports these accounts. Excavations of Celtic religious sites have uncovered human remains showing evidence of ritual killing, including bodies in peat bogs that were preserved for thousands of years, showing signs of ritual sacrifice. These weren't metaphorical or symbolic acts, they were actual human sacrifices performed during Celtic religious festivals, with Samhain being the most significant. Animal sacrifices were even more common and are well documented. During Samhain celebrations, cattle, sheep, horses and other animals would be slaughtered as offerings to Celtic deities and to feed the spirits believed to be present that night. The blood from these sacrifices was considered spiritually powerful. Druids would use it in divination rituals, splash it on sacred stones and trees, and sometimes drink it as part of ceremonies seeking supernatural power or knowledge. The massive bonfires weren't just for warmth or light. They were sacrificial fires where these killings took place. The Celts believed that the blood, smoke, and death released during these sacrifices created spiritual power that could be harnessed, and that the gods would grant protection, fertility, or favorable conditions for the coming winter in exchange for these offerings. Leviticus 17:11 reveals why blood sacrifice is so serious. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it for you on the altar to make atonement for your souls, for it is the blood that makes atonement by the life. Blood represents life itself, and God reserved blood sacrifice for one specific purpose, atonement for sin, which ultimately pointed to Christ's perfect sacrifice. When pagans used blood in their rituals to manipulate spirits or gain supernatural power, they were perverting what God designated as sacred and using it for demonic purposes. The blood sacrifices at Samhain weren't offerings to the true God. They were offerings to demons masquerading as Celtic deities, exactly what 1 Corinthians 10:20 describes. What pagans sacrifice they offer to demons and not to God. Beyond sacrifice, Samhain involved intensive occult practices. Druids would engage in divination, using various methods to predict the future or gain hidden knowledge. Historical accounts describe them casting lots, interpreting the flight patterns of birds, reading signs in nature, and examining animal entrails to discern the will of the gods or predict coming events. They would also perform rituals specifically designed to communicate with the dead, believing that on Samhain night the spirits of deceased ancestors could provide wisdom or warnings. People would set empty chairs at tables for dead relatives, prepare favorite foods for spirits, and even leave doors and windows open to allow spirits to enter freely. These weren't quaint folk customs. They were acts of necromancy, attempts to communicate with and gain knowledge from the dead. The costumes and masks used during Samhain also had darker purposes than modern Halloween costumes. People didn't dress up for fun or creativity. They wore animal skins, bones, and grotesque masks, specifically to disguise themselves as spirits or supernatural beings. The belief was that if evil spirits or demons crossed over on Samhain night and saw you, they might harm you or drag you back to the underworld with them. But if you looked like a spirit yourself, you might be left alone or even mistaken for one of them. Some historical accounts suggest that people would also dress as spirits to blend in while performing mischief or crimes, believing they could act with impunity if others thought they were supernatural beings rather than humans. The practice of wearing costumes on October 31st originates directly from the attempt to either hide from demons or imitate them, neither of which has any place in Christian practice. These practices didn't disappear when the church tried to Christianize the date. They went underground and continued, especially in rural areas where pagan traditions remained strong. Throughout the medieval period and even into the Renaissance, October 31st remained associated with witchcraft, black masses, and occult gatherings. While the Catholic Church celebrated All Saints' Day on November 1st, those involved in witchcraft and occultism recognized October 31st as their night, a tradition that continues today among modern Wiccans and Satanists. The darkness of Samhain never left Halloween, it just learned to hide better. And when Halloween crossed the Atlantic Ocean to America, something interesting happened. The darkness didn't fade, it got commercialized. Halloween didn't exist in early American history. The Puritans and early Protestant settlers explicitly rejected it because they recognized its pagan origins and refused to participate in festivals rooted in practices the Bible condemned. For the first 200 years of American history, October 31st was just another autumn day with no special celebration. But in the mid-1800s, a wave of Irish immigration, prompted by the potato famine and economic hardship, brought millions of Irish Catholics to America, and they brought Halloween with them. What had been an Irish and Scottish tradition now crossed the Atlantic and began spreading through American culture. Initially, Halloween in America looked similar to its Celtic roots, though somewhat tamed. Irish communities would gather for parties that included games attempting to predict the future. Bobbing for apples was actually a divination ritual to determine who would marry first. They carved turnips into lanterns with grotesque faces, following the jack-o'-lantern tradition. They told ghost stories and tales of spirits walking on Halloween night. They played pranks and tricks that sometimes escalated into vandalism and violence, especially by the early 1900s when Halloween mischief had become a serious problem in American cities. These weren't cute childhood pranks. They were sometimes destructive acts including property damage, assault, and riots. By the 1920s and 1930s, community leaders were actively trying to find ways to control Halloween's chaos. The solution American culture created was commercialization, turning Halloween into a consumer holiday focused on children, candy, and costumes purchased from stores rather than homemade from animal skins. By the 1950s, Halloween had been transformed into what it is today, a massive commercial industry generating billions of dollars annually through costume sales, candy, decorations, and parties. This shift seemed to make Halloween safer and family-friendly, and many Christians embraced it as harmless fun. But here's what most people missed. Commercialization didn't change Halloween's spiritual nature. It just repackaged occultism as entertainment and sold it to children. Think about what modern Halloween actually celebrates when you strip away the commercial packaging. Children dress as witches, demons, ghosts, and monsters, the exact entities and practices the Bible condemns. They go door to door in a ritual that echoes the ancient practice of offering food to spirits to appease them. They carve jack-o'-lanterns, symbols originating from pagan attempts to guide spirits. They celebrate death imagery, skeletons, coffins, graveyards, treating what the Bible calls humanity's ultimate enemy as entertainment. The commercialization made these practices seem innocent by targeting children, but the spiritual reality underneath didn't change. Halloween is still a celebration of exactly what it was 2,000 years ago: death, spirits, darkness, and the occult. Romans 12:2 instructs believers, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect." Just because American culture commercialized Halloween and made it mainstream doesn't mean God's perspective on its practices changed. The Bible doesn't say, "Avoid witchcraft unless it's commercialized," or "Communication with the dead is forbidden unless you're just pretending." God's standards don't shift based on whether something is packaged for profit or marketed to children. Halloween's commercial success is actually one of Satan's greatest victories. He took practices God condemned and convinced an entire culture, including many Christians, that they're harmless because they're now sold at Walmart. What's particularly disturbing is how Halloween's commercialization specifically targets children. The candy industry, costume manufacturers, and entertainment companies have invested billions in making occult imagery appealing to kids. Witches are portrayed as friendly and fun. Ghosts are cute. Demons are cartoonish. Magic is presented as exciting and powerful. This systematic effort to make children comfortable with occult imagery isn't accidental. It's the same strategy Satan has always used. Make evil appear harmless. Dress darkness in attractive packaging, and get people young before they develop biblical discernment. Proverbs 22:6 warns, "Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it." But the reverse is equally true. Train children that witchcraft is fun, death is entertainment, and spirits are playthings, and you've prepared them to accept the real occultism later. By the late 20th century, Halloween had become the second largest commercial holiday in America, surpassed only by Christmas. But while America was treating October 31st as a children's party, another group was taking it very seriously. And they never forgot what Halloween really represents. While most Americans treat Halloween as harmless fun, modern witches, Wiccans, and Satanists recognize October 31st for what it has always been: their most important and sacred holiday. This isn't conspiracy theory or Christian exaggeration. It's documented fact from occultists themselves. The Wiccan religion, which has grown to over 1.5 million practitioners in America, openly celebrates Samhain on October 31st as their new year and most spiritually powerful night. Satanic organizations, including the Church of Satan founded by Anton LaVey, list Halloween as one of their high holy days. Former witches who have converted to Christianity consistently testify that October 31st was the most important date in their occult calendar, the night when rituals were most powerful, when covens would gather for their most significant ceremonies, and when the barrier between the physical and spiritual world was believed to be thinnest. The occult activity that increases on Halloween night is documented by law enforcement, hospitals, and Christian ministries. Police departments in multiple states have reported increases in vandalism, animal cruelty, and even reports of ritual activity on October 31st. Animal shelters often refuse to adopt out black cats in October because of documented cases of animals being harmed in rituals. Former occultists describe Halloween as the night for initiation ceremonies, blood rituals, and practices designed to invoke demonic power. One former Satanist who now ministers to Christians testified, Halloween wasn't a costume party for us. It was our Easter, our Christmas, our most sacred night. When I see Christians celebrating it, especially Christian children dressing as demons and witches, I'm horrified. They're participating in imagery that we used in actual demon worship, and they think it's innocent. What makes Christian participation in Halloween particularly troubling is that Scripture explicitly forbids believers from participating in pagan festivals or practices connected to demons. 1 Corinthians 10:20-21 is direct. I do not want you to be participants with demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake of the table of the Lord and the table of demons. Paul isn't being metaphorical. He's telling Christians they cannot participate in activities associated with demonic worship while claiming to serve Christ. Halloween is celebrated by modern pagans and Satanists as their highest holy day. When Christians join that celebration, even in innocent ways, they're becoming participants with demons, exactly what Paul forbade. The argument many Christians make is that we're just having fun, or we don't mean it the way pagans do. But intention doesn't change spiritual reality. If you unknowingly ate food sacrificed to idols, it doesn't become spiritually neutral just because you didn't know its history. If you participate in a ritual designed for demonic worship but claim you're doing it innocently, the spiritual implications don't disappear. God cares about what we do, not just what we intend. Ephesians 5:11 commands, "Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them." Notice it doesn't say take no part unless you're just playing, or expose them except on October 31st when everyone else is doing it. The command is absolute. Take no part in works of darkness, and Halloween is fundamentally a celebration of darkness. The question every Christian must answer is simple. Why would you want to participate in the favorite holiday of witches and Satanists? Why would you celebrate on the night when occultists perform their most powerful rituals? Why would you dress yourself or your children in imagery that represents demons, death, and practices God condemns? The cultural pressure to participate in Halloween is intense. Neighbors celebrate, schools have parties, churches host harvest festivals on October 31st. But cultural acceptance doesn't determine biblical truth. Joshua 24:15 presents the choice clearly. Choose this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Serving the Lord means refusing to participate in celebrations rooted in serving demons, even when that choice makes you different from the culture around you. Halloween's history from ancient Samhain to modern commercialization reveals a consistent reality. It has always been a celebration of death, spirits, and occult practices. The packaging changed, the marketing improved, but the spiritual foundation remained identical. Christians cannot serve two masters. We cannot claim to follow Christ while celebrating the favorite holiday of those who worship demons. The call of Scripture is clear. Come out from among them, be separate, touch no unclean thing, and God will receive you. Halloween may be culturally popular, but it has no place in the life of anyone who truly follows Jesus Christ. Halloween's history reveals the truth most Christians never learn. It began as a pagan death festival involving human sacrifice and demon worship. The church failed to eliminate it by trying to Christianize it, and modern commercialization simply repackaged occultism as entertainment. From Samhain to today, October 31st has always represented the same spiritual reality: celebration of death, darkness, and demonic forces. Ephesians 5:11 commands, "Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them." Now that you know Halloween's true history, you cannot claim ignorance. Understanding truth requires knowing history. If you want to go deeper into what the Bible says about these practices, click on the video appearing on your screen right now. What shocked you most about Halloween's history? Comment below with your answer and the country you're watching from. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with Christians who need to know the truth about what they're celebrating. May God give you courage to stand for truth even when culture celebrates darkness.